I think we all want good public policy. Everyone wants that. The disagreements is how to get there, the methodology, the ideology. That's where so many of those things are. But nonetheless, we do want goodness in our system, fairness, justice, constitutional values, things like that.
My guest today is Dr. Tim Persons. He is the Government Accountability Office's chief scientist. He's one of two managing directors of the Science Technology Assessment and Analytics team. The GAO audits and evaluates and investigates federal services for Congress. It's totally nonpartisan work. His task is, in his terms, insight, oversight, and foresight in any area where federal law and policy intersects with science. In short, his job is to help science and government work together as best they can. Dr. Persons holds degrees in nuclear physics, biomedical engineering, computer science, and executive leadership. We're so glad to have him as our guest today. From the Center for Faith and Work here in St. Louis, this is Working with me, your host, Dan Doriani. Here we strive to fire the imagination of Christians who long to practice their faith in the workplace. Through conversations with doctors, athletes, teachers, executives, and more, we seek to engage those who desire to do significant work, to practice love and justice in their work, and who dare to change their corner of the world through that work. Good day, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Timothy Persons, who is known to his friends as Tim. You're a doctor, you've earned your PhD, but I'm going to call you Tim, if that's okay, in our conversation.
Absolutely fine, Dan. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Great to have you. And Tim is a nuclear physicist by training, which probably means he's smarter than anybody else who's listening to this podcast. But he also works for the government, and he has been for 13 years a senior executive working to see how science and technology correlate or work together for the U.S. Congress. And that's exciting to me because we like science on this podcast and we also like government work. So just tell us a little bit about what somebody does. You work for the General Accounting Office, and what's your role? And most people probably know what the GAO is. It's a very important organization, but in case people don't know, give us a little background.
Sure. Well, thanks, Dan. And first of all, thanks for being an environment where you are a fan of science and the government. Sometimes the old joke about I'm from the government and I'm here to help is sort of a punchline, but the government does an incredible broad array and vast things. And of course, so much of it does have to do with science. And I think we're all in the midst of a major event that is scientific. To understand it requires a good sense of science and trying to bring back normalcy and economic recovery and so on. So these are great topics, and I appreciate the chance to come on. So I have been in the federal government for nearly 20 years. I started out in the pre-9/11 era, working in the national security community, and I worked on biometrics, things that you now see on your smartphone. When you put your thumb there, you turn your phone and it looks at you and sees that, in your case, Dan, it says, okay, I see that that's Dan, and versus, like in my case, sees that it's me, and then my son can't hack that. He's frustrated by that, but we look somewhat alike, but not enough that he can fool the system and he can get in and mess around with dad's phone. So I did a lot of those things because the defense of computer networks and information and cybersecurity is of paramount importance. And I think we see that looking back just recently at things like the Colonial Pipeline hack and things like that. We've had all of we've woken up into the age of information, and perceived or actual loss of privacy or concerns about that in our digital world with lots of algorithms and so on. And so that's where I've been working in that space, just all things science and technology for some time. So as you mentioned, I am at the oversight, insight, and foresight arm of the U.S. Congress, which is the Government Accountability Office. And its mission is to help the first branch, that is the ledge branch, with the power of the purse and the ability to conduct oversight or scrutinize where money is going, how much is going where, which they are a key part of that, And also, how's the money being spent? Is it being spent in accordance with law? Is it being wasted? Is there a fraud? All the sort of things that the American taxpayer can and should care about. So I've been in that role, and I've been the chief scientist for them. And the question is, why do you have a chief scientist for what sounds like an accountancy firm? Well, it really has to do with so much of what we face. Again, has to do with science and technology issues. And these are big, complicated, what are called wicked problems, right? And I don't mean that in the moral law sense. I just mean they are so gnarly, they are so interconnected that any one entity, even the federal government itself, by itself, could not solve in that space. So I do a lot of work across many, many areas. And so there's a lot to talk about, but I'll just toss it back to you so we can go where you'd like to go.
Yeah, thanks. So that's a great introduction. And wicked problems, I totally understand. If it's a simple problem, it's cared for far, far down in the system. And only the toughest questions come up to the senior leaders. So they're, I'm sure, extremely complex. First question I have for you is, because we have an interest in this podcast on people who have multi-talented
Sure.
people, multiple skill sets. What's it like to move back and forth? It sounds like you're both an administrator, government worker, and a scientist. And my guess is that your day has a lot of shifts, perhaps. You know, you're doing hardcore science maybe occasionally, and then applying science, and then you're trying to work with a committee to communicate something that may be controversial or difficult. What's
Sure.
what's your day like as you shift around from science to administration?
Sure. So I'll appeal down to using a scientific analogy, but it is true. I feel like I'm in what's called a quantum superposition, right? When you get down to an individual quantum element, right? Think of a proton or an electron or something like that, or even an individual photon, you know, the particles that,
Right.
how light is expressed and transmitted and so on. Those things, you have that a state of a system where you're multiple things at one time. So that really describes my life. Just practically, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a scientist, and at the same time I work in the public policy area because I think we all want good public policy. I think we want good governance. Everyone wants that. The disagreements is how to get there, the methodology, the ideology. That's where so many of those things are. But nonetheless, we do want goodness in our system, fairness, justice, constitutional values, things like that. And science has become, and technology has just become an enormous influencer on that. And one but needs to have, or can only pick up the newspaper today. Again, I'm saying this where thankfully we're seeing the diminishment through vaccines that we've been blessed to have, driving down the case counts and the mortality rates and so on. But still, we're looking at the backside of a major event that has key public health and scientific dimensions to it. As well as the cybersecurity, as I mentioned before, as well as the concerns about a changing climate and energy and electrification of the driving, the fleet, the rise of nation state powers again, such as China, who want to outcompete the US in certain ways, including militarily. So weapon systems that are entirely technical and have to deal with that. Artificial intelligence that's been commoditized, that we have in our hand, that we have in little devices in our home, that we do wake words and call them out. I mean, it's lions and tigers and bears. Oh my.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say not long ago, very recently, I had a guest who's an ambassador, deputy ambassador in Africa, and they still have, this is just a couple of weeks ago, and they still have very high and increasing rates of COVID. So your work in some ways is for the United States government, it seems, yes, but it's also got a worldwide scope. And of course, if America can use its scientific expertise to help other nations, that makes the entire world a better place. That is to say, we can serve others. But we also yes, solidify our own status by being friendly and helpful to other nations. And I'm guessing you get involved in that to some degree as well.
Absolutely. I mean, if again, just going to the easy case of the pandemic, and again, hopefully we'll be out of the public health emergency in the not too distant future. We're seeing our economy reopen, mask mandates dropping, et cetera. A lot of it is vaccine driven, but it is, we look at this major historic event, right? Once a century kind of thing. When you look at the last major pandemic, the Spanish flu in 1918, that was another sort of pre-globalist type thing, but nonetheless, it showed the interconnectivity of the world, and the fact that if you ask the question, what does Wuhan have to do with Peoria? Well, right. We know the answer to that in a resounding way now. It does matter. And so that's where we have had our Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, whose mission is to be way out in front. It's not just our jurisdiction, of course, is domestically in the United States, but emerging infectious diseases are a global problem, and we need to solve them in a global context, in a system that is highly complex, not just in terms of the science, not just in terms of the logistics of generating a vaccine, but the politics, the science diplomacy that's required, all the nation state interactions, all of those things. It's a very complex time.
Yeah, it sounds like that indeed. So one of the questions I like to ask people, and I'm going to ask you now, not so that you should boast, but to help maybe people early in their career think about what God would have them do, is to consider what your skill set is. You know, Jesus said in one place, everyone to whom much is given, of him much will be required. So I'm not a scientist, but I do know a little bit about Greek. And that word required is a word used commercially in the ancient world, in ancient Greek. And it means basically our gifts are a loan from God. And so he's going to give, and he's going to require an accounting of what we've done with the capacities we've received, whether genetically by our parents and grandparents, or through mentors and training, educational opportunities, career opportunities. How would you describe your gift, what God has given you? Your skill set, what enables you to walk in the world of government and science simultaneously?
Well, yeah, thanks for the question. I think, my kids go to a school where Latin is taught, and I was reminded with them because they have to learn all these Latin roots and basic things. But so I'll throw Latin in with your Greek as well, because I think it's relevant. But the idea of vocation, the root word is vocare, where the V is just pronounced like a W, but vocare is just really, it means calling. So what is your calling, and what's implied in that? Just like in the parable of the talents, your calling is you're given talents, your job is to multiply them wherever you may go in those circumstances. And so I think having that sense of call, and really as a public servant, the word servant is in there as well. It's the idea about you're not in this for yourself, you're in this for the service to others. And I think that's where it has a powerful connection in terms of dealing with the complexities, understanding the science, supporting good governance, again, which everyone wants. And I don't think I've met anybody that has said, the government I have, I'm perfectly satisfied in every way with everything it does, right? Nobody does. In fact, the opposite is true. It's hard sometimes to find the positive out of some of those conversations, even though there's an incredible amount of success going on that just it never makes
it doesn't make the news, because
doesn't make the headlines, right?
It's not exciting. It's not fun to praise. It's more fun to criticize.
That's right. So, but I think, being part of that, we are in our system, a democratic republic where we are the government in a certain sense. We are given a vote. How we use it, what we're voting for, how we transcend what our natural impulses to, frankly, are the selfish competing interests of what do I want out of this versus what's for the good of all and things. And it's that kind of, it's for such a time as this that we need that kind of sense of calling and service. And thankfully, I was brought into that, and it wasn't, I can't claim any virtue like I woke up one day and said, I'm today going to be super virtuous and go into these things, and that my skills are going to be used in this sort of grandiose way, even though thankfully they have. That's how I know it's been a gift to have this pathway, because I didn't plan on this. I say I had 2 left turns in my career. My first one was when I was sitting and writing code at the university where I was earning my PhD in biomedical engineering. It was a lot of image and signal processing, and it relates a lot to what is going on now, what's called AI. But in any case, I was way back then, and our academic system, its strength is its weakness, right? Its strength is we have world-class system. It produces excellent people in the sciences and engineering with PhDs, but it's designed to replicate essentially more academicians. And the world is much bigger and outside of the academy, even as we have an incredible academy. And so it's been great to have good mentoring, those sort of moments where someone said, hey, have you considered this? And that's what happened. I had a mentor, a friend who came by and said, hey, have you considered, I know you're passionate about the country and the problems, and I know you're a problem solver. I think you do well. Can I have your resume? I want to send it to somebody. And I said, great, here it is. Who are you sending it to? He said, well, it was very spooky all of a sudden. I can't tell you. And, and,
Right.
and I ended up being at the pre-9/11 National Security Agency. So that was, and then the world changed with that. And then, of course, I went on and led a lot of scientific research, working on some very hard problems, and that really enjoyed that. But then peaked out in terms of, the builder phase. I'm entrepreneurial, I'm a builder and all of that. Again, part of that calling I feel is in that way. And I had another mentor who, again, I was gifted with, said, hey, have you considered working with the Congress? Which I would have never done that. Thankfully, he did.
Can I just jump in and label something?
Yeah, jump in.
For our people. So, especially for early in our careers, what we need desperately often is for somebody to take a look at us who knows us better than we know ourselves, and see something we don't see in ourselves. Another way to say it is all leaders are talent scouts. Yes. And if they're sensitive, they're not just looking for talent for themselves, for their cause. They're looking for talent that will actually fit for a substantial period of time. And so if I hear you correctly, you're saying you met a couple of talent scouts who read you correctly and said, the way God's made you, or your skill set or your interests should put you at the nexus of science and government. And you basically said, I'll try it.
Yes. Meaning I had an openness and I had a trusted relationship, but you put it very well, Dan. I think that's true. And good leadership, as these 2 men were, when they stepped in and did, I like the talent scout analogy, but good leadership always seeks to replicate itself. Right. How you bring it about. And I remember one of the mentors pointing me to a book that, frankly, it's one of those books where all you need to read is the title, and you don't have to read the book. But the title of the book was, what got you here won't get you there. So this idea about peer competition to be among, when you're sort of at the bottom end of the lower end or tier of the pyramids, shall we say, when you cross a certain threshold and things, it's no longer about you being better than the next guy or gal or whatever. It's really about you making other people great and you're winning, right? Like a baseball manager who's no longer a player on the field. It's now I'm managing. My job is to manage this team to do great things and win the World Series kind of thing. And so that's the really powerful shift. And that's been a huge gift to have the chance to do that, be trusted to do that with others.
And it's a difficult shift. A lot of people, for example, if you go from a PhD, you're the smartest kid in your class all through grade school, high school. And then you go to college and you're maybe one of the smartest, et cetera. Eventually you're with your peers and you can look at your 3.97 GPA, giving thanks you got that 1B so you could relax, right? And it just doesn't matter. After 5 years, nobody cares. All they care about is, are you making the team stronger? Do you bring your talents to bear? And are you serving the people to your right, to your left? And maybe at some horizon, not just, it's not just like the army where you're serving your buddy right and left. You're also serving greater causes. Hey, if I can, I would love to shift to something pretty different. Sure. And that is the topic of science and faith per se. And of course, we know that there's a sense out there that scientists aren't usually believers. On the other hand, if you actually talk to scientists, I almost think there's more believers among scientists. But one of the chief problems is with miracles. And science, of course, you've used the word replicate a couple times, and rightly so. science always wants to confirm things, confirm discoveries by replicating them in a lab in Hong Kong and Beirut and I don't know, Paris and Mumbai, and miracles can't be replicated. That's contrary to their nature. And so the thought is that you can't prove that the Bible is accurate. And so, belief is at a disadvantage in the scientific community. It's also true that we generally associate science with the Enlightenment, which of course, in important ways, followed the burst of scientific discovery that broke out before the Enlightenment per se did. But, the Enlightenment is allegedly, suspending of all supernatural effects, where Enlightenment's in favor of religion because ethics holds a society together. But the Enlightenment was deeply suspicious of supernaturalism of all kinds. And, maybe we're still in the Enlightenment modern phase. We can talk in a minute about pre-modern, but just give me a word or two about scientists and miracles and faith. You can speak for yourself, but maybe for others as well.
Sure. Well, I think if we really look and peel every layer back on all things on this conversation, when you talk about various systems, it's often cast as science is antagonistic to faith and vice versa. The short answer is it's not. All systems, belief systems, including those with a scientific nature core to them, are still faith systems, right? When think about a key principle of science is ex nihilo nihil fit, right? Out of nothing, nothing comes, right? So that we have the law of gravitation, the law of the conservation of energy. The speed of light is a certain constant, 2.998 times 10 to the 8th meters per second. And that's true everywhere in the universe. So in any case, we have this law that means there's something external to us, and yet it applies to us personally. It requires faith to believe in the fact that there is a law. If you believe in a law, you believe in some higher power that's an administrator or dispensation of the law. And so physical laws are in the same way. And I think that's sort of a key fundamental tenet, just recognizing every system, even an atheistic system, still has a faith component to it. Now, on your question about just in terms of miracles, I mean, when you really think about miracles, the hermeneutic I'll follow on this is just that they're signs pointing to something that only God could do. Okay. So if you ask the question, do miracles exist today, right? In the way the scriptures have them come out, well, the signs that were being pointed to at the time, like when you talk about Christ calling someone from the dead as a miracle, that's a sign to say, I alone have the power over death that no other human has. So I think it's important that was always pointed to something. The thing itself isn't, that is not God. God is what's being pointed to, as it were. But we live, if I'm asked, do we have miracles today? The question is, or my answer is yes. All right. Do I think we have new miracles in the sense of back in the times of Christ and so on? I think that could be debatable. The answer might be no, not in that sense for pointing to signs. But do we have them today? Yes. When you read Romans 1, it talks about we see the miracle of, remember, ex nihil fit, except when God said, let there be, and there is. And so we live in a miracle today, right? We see in the awe of when you do scientific exploration on things, it should engender awe. It's not some cold, refrigerated type, ultimately philosophically objective function that's really being followed. I think it has to engender awe because it really does point to something bigger and grander than us, even though it still yet is personal. It applies to us as both transcendent and immanent, which again are theological concepts that they talk about in seminary. So in any case, faith systems are there, miracles are still here. I think creation is one of them. And the laws of the fact that we have light, the fact that we have these laws and constants and so on, I think are evidence of that.
Let me summarize for the sake of others. So first of all, I hear you saying that you didn't say it quite this way, but something like this: the very existence of the universe points to God, because nothing comes from nothing. I mean, the one thing we know is we have a universe. It had to come from somewhere, but did it create itself? That's not the way things usually go. You also pointed to laws. I'm reminded of some reading I've done in Roger Penrose, who's at least an agnostic, who says it's just astonishing that we have these laws that govern the universe so faithfully and regularly. Where on earth did they come from? You would expect just total chaos and random noise. It seems to point to a designer, certainly. I love your point, in part because I say it over and over when I teach the Gospels, that the miracles are signs. You know, somebody points, you're not supposed to stare at the finger, you're supposed to follow the finger and see where it's headed.
That's right. Yep.
So I'm the resurrection of life. It's very important that Jesus raised Lazarus. He really did. Jesus rose from the dead. But it's more than an event in itself. It's an event with meaning. I also love your distinction, if you want to comment on it, between what I call capital M miracles, the miracles that pointed to the deity of Christ and his role as Redeemer, from what we could call ordinary miracles, which are things that happen that are truly gifts of God, but aren't the same in that they do not point to God's redemptive activity. So I'll just say personally, and maybe this is another podcast, out of faithfulness to James chapter 5, for about 30 years, I've been praying over the sick and laying hands as an elder, which is what James says. And I have to say, I've seen some truly remarkable recoveries, including one of my own children who had a really serious problem for about a year. And we prayed over her, and about 3 hours later, it was gone and has never come back. So I'm not saying, she had liver cancer, but it was pretty striking. But that's not the same as the miracles that Jesus, Moses, and Paul perform, because they're just God's gifts to us in response to prayer, as opposed to something that teaches us who the Redeemer is and how he operates in the world. Are we on the same wave? Are we in agreement on that?
Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah. And so let me just ask one other question. The Enlightenment approach would say that, we're just pursuing objective truth, but then there have been philosophers of science like Polanyi and Thomas Kuhn especially, who said, there's a lot of subjectivity involved in, it's not wholly subjective, but there's substantial subjectivity in the scientific enterprise as well, even in things like what counts as proof, when do we need to, what problems do we even want to consider? What problem is worth approaching and what problem isn't, which I'm guessing you're involved with a lot. What's the connection between the subjectivity and the objectivity, or the subjective and objective aspects of scientific work, maybe as you practice it back to your career in that nexus of science and government?
Sure. So I think it's a great point, because Polanyi argues, and I agree with Polanyi on this point, on this idea of objectivity in a complete, pure, base philosophical sense is not actually a real thing, right? Because the moment you have that personal observer aspect to things, right, you are, in a sense, disturbing the system. It's sort of like the Schrodinger system, where when you observe a system, you're disturbing it in a certain way. So, and there are limits to knowledge. I think that's important to remember. Fundamentally, we have fundamental limits to our epistemology. Ultimately, it's an unsettling thing when you really think about it. But I think it should cause what I think is the proper amount of humility about how objective we actually can be. I think for the purposes of building an airplane and making sure that the Bernoulli principles work, that the material science are there, can we use objective science and engineering to build an airplane to get us safely to point A to point B and do it, hundreds of times, thousands of times a day? Yes, I think that's there, but fundamentally, I think that we go too far and remove the personal from the equation, as Polanyi is pointing out. If we just think that, well, I'm just passively sitting back and it is what it is. It's right. And I have, there's no subjectivity in any of this at all. I think that's a step too far and not a fully honest system.
So let me invite. I'll just be candid here, since you spoke of epistemological humility. I know almost everything you talked about, but I'm not sure I recall Schrodinger. Do you want to tell your unenlightened host and audience what
Sure.
that's all about?
Right. So, yeah, Schrodinger was a physicist in the 19th century, talking about the idea when the idea of quanta, as you follow the sort of atomization. I think of Democritus and saying, okay, we keep dividing material, and fundamentally we get down to atoms. Well, then we found out over time that you have divisors to those atoms. You have subatomic particles, and then you have the Rutherford experiments with, is a photon a particle or a wave? And fundamentally, it's yes. It just depends
Right.
on how you observe it and the
That wasn't an answer
observation
people
of it.
expected.
Right.
Go ahead.
It's
Sorry,
a
go ahead.
shocking. Right. Well, those Danish physicist Niels Bohr that said, if you're not shocked by quantum physics, you haven't fully grasped its
Right.
implications.
Right.
Right. And we live in a quantum world, though, meaning what we experience is the Newtonian world, the thing at macroscopic scales and things like that. But in the quantum world, you're dealing now with individual things. And as I mentioned before about superposition, where it could be in a state or two different states at the same time. And so it's not until you observe it that you collapse the wave, what's called the wave function, because if you talk about a photon as a wave and not just an individual particle, then you can understand and see that collapse. The observation of it changes the state. So in any case, that's what's really surprising about that. It goes to, when you look at the atomic model, we all see, if you ever see those radiation hazard signs that may be on a truck, or you go to the hospital, it shows the classic thing of like a orbiting electron around the nucleus. This is all from our a high school science. Maybe some of us would like to have, PTSD, therapy on having to go through. But not a lick
of it is true.
Well, right. It's more accurate where they put like the electron, instead of being a discrete particle in a wave state, it's like a fuzzy, right? It's a fuzzy kind of shell, and you
like
don't know exactly.
Maybe.
Right. You can know its energy, right? It's state that, but you can't know where it is. Or alternatively, you can know exactly. Right.
Yeah.
So it really is wacky, and it sounds wacky, and rightly so. But again, it's one of those things that when you really think about it from a philosopher's standpoint, right, it's a shocking reality that we have fundamental limits on what we can know.
If I can just punctuate that point, as shocking as it is, it does instruct us to be humble about the extent of our knowledge. And so we're realists. We're not, we don't despair about knowing things. We know that our plane will take off. I'm sitting in a building that weighs many tons. I am not worried about it collapsing because people know how to build steel and reinforced concrete and so forth, and they've mastered that. But we haven't mastered everything. And there's a creator, and we're not the creator. There's a Lord, we're not the Lord. We're maybe small L lords in some ways.
Right. And what's even more interesting, because I like your building analogy, I'll just close this segment with this, but just to say, what's really shocking also is that as you're sitting on your chair, you're sitting on your floor, the structure of the building, it's approximately 90+% of that is empty space.
Yes.
I when you really boil down to the it's amazing.
I often marvel that when I touch my table or sit in a chair, I don't just fall through, because I'm mostly space, and the table's mostly space, and my fingers mostly space, the chair's mostly space.
And yet, if I go golfing, I certainly want, when my ball is about to hit that tree, because I'm a terrible shot.
Yes.
I wish that it would be mostly space and it would go straight through that tree and right onto the green, but alas, doesn't quite work that way. It would make sports pretty
rough. I'm a tennis guy. Yeah. If it was mostly space, I would never hit the ball, and you couldn't play tennis.
That's right.
Anyway.
Right.
Let me ask a very different sort of question, and that is, I'll put it this way: your job probably seems pretty glamorous to a lot of people. PhD, physics, expert knowledge, and you get to influence, public policy and do real good. What is the most exciting part about your job? What do you love the most, if you haven't covered that already? And every job is difficult as well. Everybody has to take out the garbage to some degree. Everybody has routine tasks. Can you tell us a little bit about the highs and the mundane elements of your work?
Well, I'll start with the easier question, just in reverse order, but the mundane is definitely in the 90+% of the category. And I would say most jobs that, as I was sitting back as a starry-eyed kid thinking, what do I want to do with my life? And, I'm going to college and I think about all these things. I think mastery of the mundane is a key part of any success. I think it's everywhere. And I think it's just it's a part of life, but recognizing that it's going through that, though it serves a purpose, it does have something to do with the greater and more exciting things that come out of it. And that's what I do see, is when we can do good work and provide really what we hope is not only knowledge but wisdom to our national lawmakers when they're saying, look, I need to understand this, or what's wrong with this program, or what are the implications of this major essentially we're in a fourth industrial revolution with now man-machine interfaces and machine learning and statistical systems. And it's just a different era now, right? The big companies are the FANGs, the Facebooks, Apples, Netflix, Googles. It's not, your granddad's or grandma's economy anymore in that sense. And so the world's changed in certain ways. So I think what gets me up and is what excites me is again, that sense of purpose, that sense of rightness, the calling, the chance to serve. Service is actually a privilege. And sometimes I ask, like, how did you fall into public service or something, or how did you come into public service? And I really think, well, I felt like I was called by public service. It's, I'm it's to some extent inappropriately personifying it, but I'm saying it just, these occasions presented themselves. There's need, there's gifts, skills, talents, and again, that sense of calling that helps me do that. And I have fallen into since I need to live what I preach about leadership and things like that. I really do. What excites me is seeing everyone else on my team, where I work with extraordinary people, empowering them, delegating them, and getting out of the way so that I'm not actually, my ideal state is where I'm not in their way at all, because if I start to get in that way, I actually diminish the system or the performance. So it really is about that. And so the garbage, taking it out, I mean, we all have that kind of thing. I mean, I have a wonderful wife and a home life. And as a dad, I have my own challenges on that. It's a chance to, in one sense, shift over and do service nonetheless in a different context. And so having that work-life balance and dealing with things that inevitably are there that are frustrating. And again, having those days where it's like, why am I doing this? And yet there's always that rescue of purpose that comes at the end and says, well, this is why you're doing it. Look at what's going on, and how could we, people are literally dying. There was a time, Dan, in the pandemic, we were losing at or more than the number of Americans who were lost in 9/11 every day. And it was a incessant march. And that was a very sobering thing. And by the way, you couldn't see it in the same way that every channel back in, 9/12, right? Every channel on cable was showing the smoking buildings. It's emblazoned international consciousness. This one's harder because it's harder to look at an epidemiological curve and make that as personal, even though it is personal. Bed. Right. And who's going to allow that to see someone suffocating at the bedside? Exactly. That's a terrible idea. But I'm saying we don't see that, and yet it's important and it's there. And it's so often the case that the unseen are the things that can really matter in these cases, and how we do things. So in any case,
Well, that reminds me, the most dangerous animal on earth is not the hippo, not the rhino, not the lion, but the mosquito.
Yes.
kills
Right.
far more people than anything else.
Right.
And so
Right.
it's
We're
the
still
tiny,
dealing with malaria. Exactly.
yeah, right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So we have to pay attention to little things. Are you working? Can I get a short word? Are you working anything big and exciting right now, like electric vehicles, wind farms, climate change? I know you can't do all three, but can you tell us a word? Are you working on any of those? What insight
right.
could you give us on one of those?
Right. So we are at the time of, so let's talk about vehicle electrification, right?
Okay.
When you talk about the way the government thinks about it is the fleet of cars. So that means
Right.
every car in the United States, right? It doesn't have to, it's not owned by the government. It's just saying, look at all the cars, how many of them as a percentage are electric and how many are internal combustion. Of course, overwhelmingly, we're in still the internal combustion era. So, but nonetheless, there's been major breakthroughs recently, and a lot of the manufacturers are now saying, look, I not only can I change and start doing electric vehicle type work, they're being driven by boards and CEOs and things like that. They're saying we must change. Okay, so we can't not do EV work, which used to be highly, it was a losing, from a business perspective, it was a losing thing. You could have the sense of we're doing something for the environment, but you couldn't sell a lot of cars. And we in America like our cars. We have states where the next town might be 3 hours away, right? On the other hand, we have dense urban areas like New York and LA and so on. So I think the market and the technology, this what's called convergence of things, have come into play, and the idea about how batteries are being designed. When you think about batteries, we had the lithium ion. Remember, it used to be nickel cadmium. So NiCad batteries, which were lower performing compared to the batteries you could get now, but you have to be able to pack in enough batteries to propel a heavy vehicle and to do it for a long period of time. And then you have to be able to, there's what's called an energy density problem, where you pack so much energy into a compact space, you start to actually get into that risk of the battery catching fire, right? It's still the case that, in airplanes, they say, are you packing battery? We don't want batteries. Because there's this worry about this sudden combustion of these devices and causing terrible things to happen. So in any case, there's a lot of science behind this, and there's yet still a lot of engineering and logistics, because you have to make the car resilient. You've got to make it run in all sort of conditions. You've got to have an ability, just like we have gas stations, that you can drive east to west in a internal combustion engine car now, right? When Henry Ford started pumping them off the line, that was not true.
Right.
However, okay, in the same way, what are those electrification type in that infrastructure, and who's going to pay for that? And transportation is, yes, there's big transportation bills that are run federally, but so much of the resources is expended at the state level, right? Transport is like really a state kind of thing. And every state's going to have perhaps their own twist or different twist on it, because Texas is different than Rhode Island. So in any case, that's why I'm just painting all this picture of EVs is a complicated thing. There's some exciting things coming on. There's reason to have hope for these sort of things. And yes, I work in that kind of area. Other areas of large complex systems challenges and so on. Sadly, we were working on a report in emerging infectious diseases in 2018, and we were concerned about, because if you go back in the not too distant U.S. history, we had, first of all, in 2009, we had the H1N1, the bird flu, okay. And then in the 2015 timeframe, we had the Ebola, and you remember that. And then 2017, we had Zika, which is vector-borne, or that's the fancy term for mosquito. By the way, another vector, this is a lesser known thing, but you have to carry about ticks, especially in the Northeast, and tick-borne diseases, and there's terrible things going on there. So we're incurring a massive public health liability right now, because how do we whose job is it to deal with those vectors and to deal with those sort of things? So, but we were doing this work on emerging infectious diseases because we had just seen, the Congress is tired of seeing this pattern. It's like we just feel like we're always a day late and a dollar short on that. And lo and behold, late 2019, there's some kind of release or some kind of zoonotic transfer. Zoonotic just means from an animal to a human, and then you can pass from humans to animals. And here we are today, in massive millions dead, trillions lost, hundreds of thousands out of work here in the U.S. We are, I think, thankfully, I think we're recovering, but nonetheless, so big complex issues. Again, this is part of what gets me out of bed in the day, and to deal with these sort of things. But you have to think holistically. You have to think outside of what I was trained to do. I was trained to a very stovepipe type thing topically, and naturally you have to be willing to be a constant learner, a student. That's why I have a mandate. When I hire people, I want to hire someone smarter than me at all times, right? If it's a problem if I'm smarter than you and you come, so because I'm just saying, I want to express that leadership. I need that, and I'm excited about the young people coming in that are excited about careers in public service. And
well, of course, we also have to have teams. I mean, to broaden out,
exactly.
Nobody can be an expert at everything. You have to have
some
facility at drawing out the expertise of people in a team of, maybe an immediate team of 5 or 10, but also a much larger team.
Right.
So that,
and we're with social media and with a lot of things. I think we're blessed with some recent generations that are naturally good at teaming, which is nice, right? So you have a key, those folks are exciting because they want to be and work together, right? That's probably one of the hardest things in the pandemic for them has been, if you're isolated at home, they're just not, that's not what they were built for in doing that, right? Yeah. And so the ideal is for some of these complex things, exactly as you're saying, is having teams that you want to have wisdom of the older crowd like myself, right? If I have any wisdom at all, right? But also the creativity and the team-oriented nature of the younger set, I think is very important. So
yeah, you need boundary crossers too, people who are comfortable in more than the stovepipe or the silo that we dwell in. I want to ask you a series of rapid fire questions. The goal, we always try to end with this, is to have you answer each one in less than 60 seconds. And you get a super bonus if you do it in under 15 seconds. But,
okay, so not all of them in under 60 seconds. Okay, so each one.
Well,
that's fine. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, let's get the quantum clock going. So what do you do to play or relax? How do you have fun?
I
golf,
just,
but what is that? The
answer? Well, unfortunately, I haven't been out and done golf in some time now. But one of the things with having had kids at home and things, my daughter just graduated, but we just like to be together. I think we're a quality time family. But it was simple things you'll see is in the pandemic, I was just doing things like, let's go out and throw baseball with my son. He would be like, Dad, you want to throw? And I was training myself to be like, I could always say, no, I'm busy, I've got something, because it's true. I always have something, but I need to tweak the prioritization algorithm to say, you know what, this is an important time. I'm not going to have him, but so long. He's going to be gone, and then I'll be wishing like, why didn't I say yes to that? Because there's always going to be more work. So I like that. My daughter is, she's not the most accomplished pianist for her age and grade and so on, but she plays very well. I just enjoy listening to her play because I now live vicariously through her. I was at least maybe a B, maybe a C student in piano years ago. I didn't want to do all my practicing. I was wondering why my mom was making me do this. My daughter's not so. She's cut out in the mold where she has done the work. She's a joy. So I enjoy that.
Well, that's great, just to play ball with the kids or make music or even listen to music. Those are things certainly I deeply resonate with. I'm sure a lot of us do. Second question is a crazy one. Practical considerations aside, what job would you take for 1 year? What would you do if you could do anything for 1 year?
Yeah, this is going to be a governmenty answer, but I think it's so. But what I want to say is I'm in a business, or my agency is all about government reform, but a lot of the government reform efforts on the executive branch side can come through the Office of Management and Budget, or the OMB.
Oh, come on! I thought you were going to say you want to be president for a year. That was the obvious conclusion to that line of reasoning was president for a year.
Yeah, the reason, Dan, let me just give you the insight of that. I remember it's very poignant, and every president does it. If you do a time lapse photo of every
Yes,
president from when they
yes,
do inauguration to when they go out,
they fall
it
apart.
ages. It's dog years, right? I mean,
Mm,
it is a tough job. Um,
yeah.
and whenever I go to college campuses and people are saying, tell me about this and that, and there's this view that the president has this, superpower, I can just do whatever I want to do. And that's simply not true. It's more like at the fall festival when I point out the beehive that's buzzing around in the glass case thing. And the
Mm,
whole issue, the farmer says, can you find the queen? And the way to find the queen is you look for the clock face, because there's the
mm.
queen, and then there's all the tending bees around
Yes,
the
right,
queen, and then there's the bazillions of
right,
drones that are all doing the busy work, right?
right.
But the view of the queen is like, well, she's the queen, she can do whatever she wants, but
No,
that as actually it's
she's
inverted.
surrounded at
The
all
queen
times.
is serving the entire hive in her
Yeah,
job. She's
yeah,
surrounded at all times, being fed things that and her job is to lay egg after egg after egg
right.
until she dies, and then
Yeah,
they find a way to have new queen, and thus it goes. So the point is to say, I use that vignette because I say the presidency is like you're the queen, where you have to make decision after decision after decision, and you have this bubble around you feeding you, and you otherwise have no other idea about really what's going on because you're the president. It's not a job. That's what I'm saying. It's not a job to take lightly. It's a very important job, and as we're called to, we need to, always lift up our leaders
yes.
in prayer at time, because those decisions, the eggs they lay kind of thing, need to be as wise as
So,
possible.
so what I'm hearing
Uh,
is if I'd said for one day, you would have said, "Sure, I'll be president for a day." Just kidding. Uh, you know.
well, I think there's I think having a lot of experience in the government reform type and what could be done. I'm just saying a key position like that, or like a secretary of something, or like a director of
Yes.
OMB, the Office of Management and
Mm.
Budget, to actually have the chance to have an effect, but to
That
do it in a
maybe
way that could be long term and lasting. I think would be 1 year. All practicalities aside, that's what I would do.
I don't think it's just sitting here. I don't think it's impossible that that could be your position someday. Maybe that'll happen. Maybe we'll read about that someday. If you were two more questions, if you
Sure.
were training a talented newcomer, what would you most want to teach him or her? They're working in your field, and I'll let it
Hmm.
be, that nexus again of science and policy, or science or policy. What would you say to a bright 25-year-old?
Well, first of all, I would say, you have every reason to think of success and to believe in this. It's exciting times, but you're needed, and you need to, really need to practice the art, or the discipleship, as it were, of servant leadership now, right? You
Mm,
don't wait until you promote into the C-suite, as
mm,
industry would call it, and then start to do servant leadership.
right.
That process is now, right? And that's what can it's Kennedy, right? It's not, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you could do for your country. And if we're honest, we live in a time where a lot of it's all about me, what's in it for me, right? And this is now a different thing. It's saying, well, let's invert that equation, talk about what you can do, and there's actually freedom, there's joy, there's peace, there's things to live in that all out, in that vocational calling way. That's what I would communicate to the up and comer, because again, just like I was saying in the book, it's what got you here isn't going to get you there. It's no longer about what you think in this way. So
Even in Christian circles, and you don't have to comment on this. I got one more question for you, but even in Christian
sure.
circles, I noticed there are books written with things like titles like Halftime. And the implication is, we know that Christians, the book isn't advocating it, but the thesis or the assumption is that for 25 years, you build your career, you build your wealth, and then when you've made it, you can start looking out for other people. It's time at the age of 50 or 52 to look out for other people. But I like your corrective to that. You read a lot. If our readers wanted to read something that would make them better consumers of scientific literature or help them understand the government better, what would you have them read? Is there a book or an author, maybe even a magazine that you would say,
Yeah.
here,
So I'm gonna
read
I'm gonna
this?
Sure. I'm going to cheat because you were talking about science and government. I have two answers. So,
Okay,
but I
okay.
think these are great books. On the science piece, if you want to have a look at a view from a scientist and theologian on this, I thought a very well done book. It's my favorite one to refer to, is called Redeeming Science by Vern Poythress.
Mm-hmm.
So he's a teaching elder in the PCA, and
He was my
he
professor
is
years ago, for what it's
okay.
worth.
Well, there
Yep.
you go. So right, he's a Caltech grad, a PhD at Harvard, and I thought just has done a masterful job on talking about a number of the questions, or better, we'll have much better answers to some of your earlier questions on that. So I would commend that one. The second one is actually a more recent one. I really am a huge fan of a number of the founding fathers, but I wanted to talk about one in recent history, which I think is aside from George Washington, he's the most influential soldier statesman we've had in our history, and that's George Marshall, who was the mentor at one time to Eisenhower, right? So Eisenhower is one of those what I call fine wine presidents. He keeps getting better with age. Marshall, there's an excellent book out there called George Marshall, Defender of the Republic. It's written by, the author's name is David Rohl. It's a 900-page thing. It looks like a monster, but you can read it like a novel or a novella almost, because it does show you the inside of what government is like. And when you're dealing with things like, it was the fact that we have the selective service and the draft is because of Marshall, and the fact that we won World War I under Black Jack Pershing's leadership, where Marshall was the key planner. I mean, Marshall was a key part in that, which again set the stage. So the whole 20th century, where he ultimately ended up being secretary, not only the chief of staff of the army, which was very powerful there during World War II, to help to win the European campaign, to lobby heavily to get the Normandy invasions, and then went on to be one of the greatest, if not the greatest, Secretary of State we've had in our history. And so anyway, I strongly advise that if you want a picture of what the government is like, but someone who's a public servant doing that, that is an excellent book to read.
That's a great recommendation. And I think I'm going to make that my summer reading, because these great biographies can be so inspiring. They can be so character forming. So
yes,
thank
absolutely.
you for that. Yeah.
Right.
Well, Tim and Dr. Persons, I'll close by giving your title again. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your expertise with us and helping us understand how a Christian can work with good conscience and joy in the government and in the sciences. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Dan.
Working with Dan Doriani is a production of the Center for Faith and Work St. Louis. We seek to promote faithfulness in the workplace, in education, in discipleship, and in the stories of believers who've applied their faith at work. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and rate us on your preferred podcast platform. You can visit our website at faithandworkstl.org. There you can subscribe to our podcast, sign up for our newsletter, learn more about Faith and Work cohorts, leave us a message, and more. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Faith and Work STL, and find the video version of this show on our YouTube channel. All these links are available in the podcast show notes and on our website. Thanks for listening.